So today we're looking at some of the most famous psychological experiments from the 20th century. Each of them reveals something profound about human nature, whether it's Pavlov's dogs or Milgram's obedience tests. These experiments uncover how humans behave and what we can learn from the experiments and apply to our own lives. So there's a few experiments that I want to discuss. The first is Pavlov's dogs, and it demonstrates the power of conditioning and habits. So in the early 1900s, Russian psychologist or physiologist Ivan Pavlov discovered a critical principle while studying the digestive system of dogs. What he would do is he would ring a bell, feed the dogs, ring a bell, feed the dogs, ring a bell, feed the dogs. After a while, though, the bell alone would be enough to make the dogs start salivating. And this was on the basis that they've associated the bell with food, and ultimately salivation is part of that process. This led to a concept called classical conditioning, where a neutral stimulus, the bell in this case, became associated with a natural involuntary response, which is salivation. So what did we learn from this? We learned that we too, humans, can be conditioned to react to certain cues or triggers. We've all experienced it, whether it's feeling hunger when we hear the lunch bell at school, or we salivate when we smell our favourite food. Whether as soon as we get home, we want to go to the loo. But it also extends to more complex behaviours. If you find yourself procrastinating every time you sit down at your desk, your brain has likely conditioned itself to associate the desk with discomfort and trying to avoid the horrible tasks that are in store when you sit at this desk. As humans, we are creatures of habit. We form habits based on repeated stimuli, rewards, punishments, and these habits can dictate our actions without us even realizing it. The experiment tells us that our behaviors are shaped by the associations we make in our environment, whether it's the bell and the food or whether it's the desk and the procrastination. What you can do then is you can use this to your own advantage. I used to work 7 days a week, and I still work 7 days a week in some respect, but I used to have two full time, well, not two full time, but two jobs employed. And what used to get me through is knowing that after work I could have a beer. And it's not a positive stimuli, don't get me wrong, but it's a way to condition myself to go to work and appreciate the reward at the end. Maybe you want to do it a different way. If you want to develop a morning workout routine, maybe associate it with something you enjoy. Maybe you listen to your favourite songs, a podcast, or a morning smoothie afterwards. When you consistently do this, the habit will become stronger over time. Conditioning is not just merely for dogs, it's for humans as well. You can use it to your advantage if you understand this. And obviously, it can be used against us, and our mind can sometimes associate bad things with this type of conditioning, and actually, it can hinder our progress. Therefore, can we reprogram our conditioning response to be something of benefit, whether it's the fight or flight or something else? We can condition ourselves to allow for optimum performance. Another experiment then. It's the Milgram's obedience experiment. So this is quite a controversial one. I mean, I suppose they all have their controversy. But in the 1960s, Milgram conducts an experiment where participants were instructed to administer severe electric shocks to a person next door to them. So they couldn't see the person, but they could hear them through the speaker, through a radio. But the people on the other end were actors. They weren't really being shocked. They were asked questions. If they gave an incorrect answer, they were shocked. What Milgram discovered was that about 65%, so the majority of people, administered the maximum shock. So they went to the top end and delivered the biggest shock, even when they could hear the actor was screaming in pain. And they simply did this because the authority figure told them to. This demonstrates how authority has an influence on your behaviour. You could have someone dress up as a police officer and get you to do things because they have that authority over you. People who worked for Adolf Hitler killed people on the basis of that was what I was told to do. All of us, in some ways, are capable of things like that. And actually, we can go against our moral compass simply because we perceive the figure giving the command to have authority over us. It shows us that individuals often defer responsibility to others in position of power and give accountability away, but leading to behaviours that they might not otherwise condone. There is that tendency, then, isn't there? It's rooted in social structures that have existed throughout human history, from military to government organisations, institutions, and it's how societies have functioned by creating a system of rules and hierarchies where people often put trust in those with perceived power. Sometimes, then, if we look at this from a personal perspective, it's not always right to follow authority. Even though it's in our nature, we should critically evaluate those in power, your boss, your manager, your government. And just because someone tells you to do something, even your parents, it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. In your personal life, business, relationships, it's important to question authority when necessary and follow your own moral compass. You don't need to blindly follow orders, especially if it goes against your values. Think critically, trust your intuition, make choices of your own, and don't be too afraid to challenge the norms when it aligns with your principles. So we know that actually we can do things we don't want to do because we're told to do by someone above us. Can we be our own authority? Can we force ourselves to do things? This is another way of looking at it. Can we force ourselves to continue to do things we don't want to do? Do we see ourselves as an authority? I use an example here as well on this type of thing where people will get up at 5 in the morning because they've got to get to work for 6, and they will get up, you know, any any day to go to work, whether they've been out late or not. But if they haven't got work, they won't get up because they want to lie in. So they would rather get up early and go to work for this boss who they hate than work for themselves, if that makes sense. Get up for yourself. Have that day. So this is what I would take away as well from this is actually, can you be your own authority as well as all of the other lessons involved in that study? The next study is Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment. It's about power and the corruption of identity. So this was conducted in 1971. College students were assigned roles as either guards or prisoners in a simulated prison environment. They were told it was simulated as well. Within a few days, though, the guards began to display abusive behaviour towards the prisoners. The prisoners became passive, submissive, and some of them actually believed they couldn't escape, they couldn't get out. They were there forever. The experiment had to be terminated after only 6 days, despite being scheduled for 2 weeks. The experiment actually demonstrates the immense power of situational factors and group dynamics. It shows how quickly individuals can conform to their roles they're given, even when placed in a high pressure environment with clear power imbalances. The guards, students, who had no prior violent tendencies became tyrannical simply because of the authority they were given. What's the saying? Power corrupts absolutely, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, or something along those lines. Or power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, is everyone, when they get to a high level of society, going to be like those in charge? You say, oh, this person at the top is like this. He's tyrannical, but this proves that maybe anyone put in that situation would act the same, or maybe you're different. It's a stark reminder of how environments and roles can shape behavior in profound ways. It's easier for us to believe that the behaviors exhibited in the experiment are abnormal, but they highlight how easily ordinary people can become corrupted by power. It's important to understand accountability in social systems. Now, the other thing to ask is actually, if that's the case, if we do conform to our roles, what kind of role do you want to be? Do you want to be the prisoner and starting to feel helpless, even if you have got a way out? In this case, it's an experiment. Or do you want to be someone in charge, even if you're lacking morals? This is the question only you can answer. In your own life, then, be aware of how you react to different environments. Are you becoming passive in a toxic workplace culture? Are you exerting unhealthy control over others? Are you having or on the receiving end of that control? You can, if you understand this, you can navigate such situations, enabling you to either protect yourself or avoid being a toxic leader. You would need to understand self-awareness and establish boundaries. But yeah, it's one of those things that again, much like the Milgram one, we might think that we're great and we've got huge morals, but actually sometimes we can get carried away with the power. Sports people, athletes, they might have been quote unquote loyal in the past to their other halves, but if they've got thousands of women coming out their door wanting to go out with them, then they're going to assume that role, even if they don't believe in that being the right course of action. Or maybe they do believe that's the right course of action. But again, it's what do you see as that role? Down to your interpretation, I suppose. And the last one is the Asch conformity experiment, the social pressure to conform. This is a really telling experiment about human nature, actually, and how we conform when we shouldn't. So essentially, he showed participants a line on a card and asked them to choose which of the other three lines on the wall were the same length. And it was pretty clear which was the same length, by the way. They're not, millimeters apart. It's literally, let's say the line was 5 centimeters. There's one on the wall for 5 centimeters, one for 10, and one for 15. So pretty clear differences. Now, all the people in the room with that person were actors, and they purposely chose the wrong line. So if, let's say, it was a 5 centimeter line and line A was 5 centimeters, all the actors would pick B. Now, the person sitting there is probably thinking, well, that's stupid. I can see it's A. Now, despite knowing that, many participants conformed to the wrong answer. In fact, about 75% of participants conformed at least once during the experiment. What do we learn? We learn that actually peer pressure is real. Although we know the right answer, other people can mislead us to say, well, actually, no, this is the right answer, even if we know it's not right. We should then be more confident in our own ability, our own judgment. instead of wanting to just fit in. I know it's part of human nature, but again, if we understand that this can be the case, we maybe sit back and think, well, actually, am I just conforming just to fit in, or is that the right course of action? As Robert Greene put it, sometimes when you're on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. In conformity, look, it's a survival mechanism that's been ingrained in us over centuries. We wanted to be part of a group for protection, and exclusion obviously meant danger. But we should think independently. Every situation, understand what you want to gain, what's your view of it, and maybe be bold enough to act on that without consulting others too much. And yes, there is a time to consult others, but actually, sometimes consultation of others can diminish your ambition, your dream, and what you know to be right. Don't be afraid to challenge the group either. Stand firm in your values. So, what do these experiments show us? Whether it's the Pavlov's conditioning, the Milgram's obedience study, Zimbardo's prison experiment, or the Asch conformity test. It helps us to understand how humans can behave. Maybe you can use this to your advantage and exploit others. I'm not saying to do that. Or maybe you can exploit yourself. You are not at the mercy of these forces yourself if you understand them. Once you recognize the patterns, you can begin to consciously choose how to respond to them. Whether it's conditioning your mind for better habits, questioning authority, avoiding toxic environments, or daring to be different, the power is in your hands. So think about it. Next time when you're in any of those situations, try and ask yourself, oh, well, actually, yeah. And remember back to it. Oh, I remember these experiments actually. Yeah, that's right. Humans should act like this, but I'm not going to. I'm different than the rest. I'm going to act correctly and I'm going to win.